Certainly, this has certainly backfired on Israel's plan then, right? Because like you had just mentioned, it has been well documented that Israel actually has supported Hamas over the years, mainly to create that division. So for those of you that aren't clear, Hamas does have the stronghold in Gaza, but there are many Palestinians in Gaza and, more on the West Bank that oppose Hamas. So it is, creating this internal division, right? It's not a united Palestinian front. So it was really a move from Israel and certainly Netanyahu to support Hamas in the sense of, now you've broken up the support in Palestine. It's not a united front. Therefore, they won't be moving towards statehood. And that has seemed to now backfire, obviously, because of these attacks that were carried out on October 7th. Scott, I've got an interesting thing I want to shift to because there is a new article that was just written in the Financial Times. I'm going to bring it up here, is that fears grow that Israel has no plan agreed for a post-war Gaza. And when we read this article, it says the lack of an exit plan is one factor in the delays to the Gaza ground operation that has been long threatened by Benjamin Netanyahu's government. There is no plan for the day after. And this is the quote from the article that really stands out, as the Americans went crazy when they realized there was no plan. So I want to talk to you about this specifically because, initially, I think it was on October 9th or 10th, maybe, a couple days after, Netanyahu sent out a very clear message. He said, northern Gaza, 1.1 million people, you have 24 hours to evacuate, move into southern Gaza, we're coming in. Obviously, at the time, that was an impossible request, right? There's no way they could move 1 million people in less than 24 hours. And there was a huge concern, right, that all of a sudden, potentially 1 million people are going to get caught in these crossfires. It's now been almost 2 weeks. We haven't seen Israel, make this move yet. And I think now we're starting to see a little bit of pushback from the Americans saying, what is the eventual plan here? Are you going to move forward with this? So I want to kind of get your thoughts on this as far as, does the ground invasion happen? If they are to be moved from northern Gaza for this ground invasion, this is the innocent civilians we're talking about, where do they go? There's only one place that kind of makes sense, I guess, at least from the Israeli side. They're saying they could potentially go to the Sinai Peninsula, which is basically just a vast open desert. So I want to get your thoughts on this next phase here and what's now happening as Israel potential ground invasion is just a few days away, and what's really going to happen next.
Well, first of all, I just want to set the stage. Everything we're talking about is a war crime. Let's just be straight up honest about this. The concept of demanding that 1 million people leave their homes and move is a war crime. It's collective punishment. It's against the law. So anybody who sits there and says, we should consider, you're no better than the Nazis. You're no better than any war criminal that's ever existed. The fact that Israel is allowed to articulate this policy and not be held to account is stunning. The concept of collective punishment, which Israel has codified as official doctrine since 2006, is called the Dahawa Doctrine, mowing the grass, is a war crime, a literal war crime. It's collective punishment. But nobody's saying anything. Everybody's just sitting there going, well, it's Israel, it's the Palestinians, it's normal. I guess it's normal for Israel to commit war crimes against Palestinians because they do on a daily basis. Everything Israel is doing in this conflict is a war crime. So right off the bat, we can't legitimize a war crime by saying, well, those 1 million people got to move. No, they don't. Those 1 million people can't move, and they're not going to move. No one's going to open up the gates. They're not going to the Sinai. The tragic reality is those 1 million people will die before they move. And now the question is, how much death will the world tolerate before they step in and tell Israel, enough is enough, you're done? Israel will not launch a ground incursion, a large-scale ground incursion into Gaza. They can't do it. There's American military teams right now telling them, you can't. Again, the question is, it's not just a political end game, it's a military end game. You go into Gaza and then what? They don't have a plan. Remember, Israel was taken by surprise on October 7th. So everything that's happening right now is basically a plan they're making up on the spot. Right. They're making it up. They've done 2 major military exercises recently. One, Chariots of Fire last year, this year, Firm Hand. All of them were what we call stress tests. They were stress testing the entire Israeli military establishment, premised on the notion that everything went bad at once, meaning Gaza, Hamas, West Bank, Palestinian Liberation Organization, Hezbollah, Syria, and Iran. First of all, each time Israel was swamped. They couldn't handle it. But the other thing about the stress test is they never considered this. Under no circumstances in these stress tests did they ever say, okay, part of the Israeli response will be to mobilize 300,000 Israeli reserves and send them to Gaza. Right. The reserves were mobilized and sent to Lebanon to fight Hezbollah. Gaza and the West Bank were considered to be police actions against militants, against terrorists, but not an outright war. So whatever war plan Israel had has been shredded, thrown away, and they're making it up as they go along, which means they don't have a clue what they're doing. And that's what's driving the Americans crazy, because Israel's saying we're going to go into Gaza, and America's saying, wait, what's your plan?
Right.
What are you going to do, Israel, now that you locked in 300,000 troops to Gaza when Hezbollah comes across the border up north? Right. Because in your real war plan, which we coordinated with you, you had most of your forces up there. And I tend to believe in the war game, you lost, because Hezbollah has all these missiles. They swamped your air defense. They blew up your cities. They blew up your military bases, and they seized northern Israel. So now you won't have any forces up there. And if you take a look at what's happening right now, the Israeli armor units up there, they're almost in revolt because Hezbollah is picking their tanks off one by one by one. I think it's 22 Merkava tanks have been blown up so far. And when I say blown up, that means dead crew members. Hezbollah is suffering casualties too. Israel's responding back. But my point is, this is not an invincible Israeli army. Right. This is an army that Hezbollah has been studying the fight for, continuously since 2006 when they last beat Israel. Israel's army today is an army of soft people who join. They don't train hard. I mean, you're getting reservist generals coming in saying they don't know how to clean their weapons. They're not motivated. These guys would give them equipment. They don't wear it right. They're not in physical condition. I was talking to a Russian colonel who was talking about urban warfare, the Russian lessons from Mariupol and Bakhmut. He said, the first thing is you have to be extraordinarily fit to do this.
Right.
Because you're wearing around 50, 60 pounds worth of combat kit.
Right.
And if you're not wearing it, you're going to die.
Right.
Because you're going to get hit in the head. You're going to get hit in the chest. You're going to get hit in the groin, in the back. And if you're not wearing this gear, you're dead. This way, you might get knocked down. You might get wounded, but at least you'll be alive. But you got to wear the gear. He said in running across, because you don't walk, running from point A to point B, constantly getting up, getting down. He says, if you're not training for this, you're in trouble. He said, we had to take our units and go out. In addition to training on tactics, we had to get them physically fit. They had to be used to wearing this stuff. The reservists right now, these are fat donut-eating boys and girls. They're not well fit. They're going to exhaust themselves. They're going to go across into Gaza, and they're going to drop like flies, not from Hamas fire, but just from heat exhaustion and the fact that they can't carry the weight. They're not conditioned to do it. They don't have the proper tactics. Again, the guy was saying, we had to learn that you don't use SWAT tactics, because everybody plays Call of Duty and everybody watches the movies. And of course, all the commandos get together at the door, and then they shotgun in and they shoot the thing up. And he says, you do that, a drone comes in, drops a mortar on you, kills everybody. Right. In modern war, you're dispersed. And you have to train to do that. It's a whole new mindset of dispersal, et cetera. Israel hasn't trained to do this. So
Scott, do you think that? Do you predict that Israel will not go in with this ground invasion? Do you think that
Israel can't go in with this ground invasion? There's two reasons why. One, they're going to lose. And the Americans are telling them straight up, you're going to lose. What Israel will do is have small incursions. You'll see raids going in. But the idea of 100,000 Israeli troops lining up their tanks and going in, that isn't going to happen. Yeah. And one of the main reasons why it's not going to happen is America's saying, what do you do when Hezbollah comes across the border? Right. What's your plan?
Right, because you're spread too thin, right? You've got all the
troops. Not only that, but Hamas just wiped out Iron Dome. Iron Dome, they've shot all their ammunition. There's no ammunition left. They're begging America for more. We gave them the last 360 odd rounds we have. We've got nothing left. We're trying to produce it, but you can't produce it overnight. And there's 200,000 rockets in Hezbollah's arsenal. 200,000. Let's say Israel has 3,000 interceptors left. Hezbollah simply fires 3,000 rockets. Israel expends everything. Now they have 197,000 more that'll come in and hit Israel without any defense. Nothing.
So, Scott, you've brought up a good point here, and is that a bigger threat to the north, Hezbollah? And I want to shift our strategy here and our conversation more towards Iran now, because I think there is a lot of speculation that the potential is for a bigger conflict here in the region to really erupt. And I think this is why the United States obviously immediately sent over military aircraft carriers. I mean, we've got a huge military envoy going over there right now, already there. And I think this is a very sensitive situation. Obviously, when when we look at the Russia-Ukraine situation, Ukraine, we can say is an ally, but certainly nowhere like Israel. I mean, we would never put boots on the ground in Ukraine for any matter. But I think if push comes to shove, we would certainly see American troops on the ground, or we would see, America rushing to do whatever it needs to do to stabilize that region. What do you feel is the biggest threat right now? I mean, do you feel that there is a big potential for a conflict between the U.S. and Iran? And what is your thoughts on the grander picture if this does not stay contained and it really erupts into a larger regional conflict? What does that look like to you?
Well, let me just start by pointing out that I think the greatest threat to Israel is actually from Hamas, not from Hezbollah, because it's Hamas that has brought the issue of a Palestinian state to the forefront. And that's the biggest threat to Israel's vision of a greater Israel. It undoes decades of Israeli policy. So that's the greatest threat. Let's talk about Hezbollah real brief. Hezbollah doesn't want to fight Israel. They don't want to. Hezbollah is focused on governing in Lebanon. They're a political party in addition to having this very strong militia. But their goal right now, Lebanon is a nation that's devastated by a collapsing economy, and Hezbollah is part of the government trying to build a functioning coalition. The last thing they need is a war with Israel, where Israeli bombs level West Beirut as they did in 2006. So Hezbollah is not itching for a fight. This is why Hezbollah has said, as long as what Israel doesn't cross the line of tolerance, we'll stay out of this fight. And Hamas has told everybody, we got this under control, guys. We don't need you. We got this under control. And they do. They're in total control of the situation. It's callously, they don't care about the people upstairs, or they do, but they're like Charles de Gaulle, they're willing to sacrifice them for the greater good. If you asked the majority of Palestinians, if you could die, give your life for the birth of a Palestinian nation, they would say yes, because for 75 years, that's all they dreamed of. And now, thanks to Hamas, they have that possibility. Hezbollah does not want to be a part of the fight. Iran does not want to be a part of this fight. Again, Iran has met with the Hamas political leadership in Qatar, and we're told the same thing. We don't want you to intervene. We got this under control. What's that tell you? When the Israelis say, we know that Iran gave the green light. Iran knew nothing about this. This took Iran totally by surprise, just like Hezbollah was taken by surprise. And Iran is just saying, hey, guys, we just normalized relations with Saudi Arabia. Big deal. I mean, it's a huge deal.
Which, by the way, was negotiated by China.
By China.
Yeah.
We are now joining BRICS.
Right.
We're a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Our focus is economic. We are focusing on getting the economy of Iran, which has been suffering under sanctions for decades, on its feet, moving forward. The last thing Iran needs is a war, and they don't want a war. They want to avoid a war. And they have communicated this to the United States, which is another reason why the United States is telling Israel, you're not going into Gaza, guys, because nobody wants this war. You're going to lose the war. You can't win. And if you go in, you risk turning this into a regional war that nobody wants. Now, we know, if you've read Barbara Tuchman's book, The Guns of August, we know that in World War I, in the summer of 1914, nobody wanted a world war, but everybody slow walked their way to it because it was just one of these things, like a slow-moving traffic accident that is going to be horrible, and you're watching it, and you're not doing anything to stop because it's inevitable. We could be on that path. Hopefully, we're not. Hopefully, the United States has communicated appropriately, not only with Israel, but with Hezbollah and with Iran, that we want to avoid escalation. This is why, if you noticed last night, there was a massive attack against American bases in Syria and Iraq by so-called Shia resistance forces. 24 Americans, according to the news, were wounded, soldiers. One contractor died of a heart attack. Now, normally, this would be the kind of thing that would precipitate massive American counterstrike. But have you seen American bombers in the air dropping bombs? No. Why? Because this is called escalation management. Right. This is where we are going to absorb a certain amount of punishment as sort of like a safety valve. You want to bleed off this pressure, bleed it off. But what you have to ensure when you bleed off the pressure, that you're not doing anything to generate more pressure. Again, let me just make this point. For the first time in a long time, there is a chance for real peace in the Middle East, because you could never talk about genuine peace in the Middle East if it didn't include a legitimate Palestinian state. Thanks to Hamas, thanks to what Hamas did, that option is now on the table, and there's recognition by everybody that there will be no going forward, no return to the status quo without a Palestinian state being created. This is bad news for Israel, but it's good news for Israel. Israel wants security. There will never be security without a Palestinian state because there will always be conflict.
Right.
There will always be a war. Israel somehow believes that they can make this problem go away. They haven't. The only way this problem goes away is what we talked about earlier. You create a legitimate Palestinian state. You allow the Palestinian people now to have hope based upon their own hard work to create their own nation. And you instantly delegitimized the kind of violence that Hamas is promoting. You will compel Hamas to become a political entity dedicated to the growth and prosperity of a Palestinian state, or else they will be thrust into the trash bin of history by the Palestinian people because they have no legitimate reason to continue.
Right.
So there's now, for the first time in a long time, legitimate hope for peace in the Middle East.
Do you think that, now I would imagine that Israel